On August 30th of last week, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, died. The wise men and women of the media, as well as some major ruling class figures, extensively covered and commented on this event, using to draw lessons from their point of view about autocracy versus democracy, about war and peace, about socialism, dictatorship, and democracy. As usual, these lessons were distorted through the lens of capitalist thinking and interests. Those so-called lessons have leaned on and reinforced all kinds of outright lies about the real history of the revolution in Russia. As the leader of the Russian Revolution and the truly great communist V.I. Lenin said, it takes 10 pages of truth to unravel a single paragraph of falsehood. We're not going to do that unraveling tonight, but we are going to post resources on revcom.us tonight to help ground you in the real truth about the history of the Soviet Union. Instead, here, tonight, we want to focus on one question in particular. What lesson can be drawn from the rise and fall of Mikhail Gorbachev for the situation within the U.S. today? Now, the Soviet Union, which Gorbachev headed, hasn't existed for over 30 years. Most people today don't know much about it, and some may not even have heard of it. So let's quickly do some background. The Soviet Union came into existence in the years after the 1917 Russian Revolution. This revolution overthrew one of the most oppressive empires in the world, ruled by a king called the Tsar. This was followed by 5 years of civil war that ended in victory for the revolution and brought together 15 nations into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR. This was the world's first socialist country, dedicated to liberating all of humanity. But by the time Gorbachev assumed leadership, the Soviet Union had been socialist in name only for 30 years. The one-time inspiring revolution had kept its name and some of its outward forms. But by the mid-1950s, a new leadership corps came to power that began to restructure the economy on a fully capitalist basis. The one-time revolutionary base area for the world revolution was now locked in a deadly rivalry with the United States to be top dog imperialist power. During the 1980s, this rivalry became extremely intense. America used its far wealthier economy to massively build up its edge in nuclear warfighting, as well as its armed forces generally. And the U.S. leadership made clear that it was more than willing to gamble with the very existence of humanity to maintain its monstrous empire. Key forces within the Soviet ruling class assessed that they could not hope to prevail militarily against the U.S. Something new, something different had to be done. The old ways wouldn't work for them anymore. Enter Gorbachev, who rose to power in 1985 with a program of political and economic reforms designed to strengthen the Soviets' hand against the U.S. This program included glasnost, which promised more openness in society to dissent and debate, and perestroika, which aimed to restructure the economy to make it more efficient and profitable.
Это Горбачев.
Горбачев?
Это из-за него у нас в экономике бардак.
Да благодаря ему у нас новые возможности.
Это из-за него у нас политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас свобода.
Полный хаос.
Перспективы.
Политическая нестабильность.
Да благодаря ему у нас есть писахат.
За Горбачева!
За Горбачева!
Gorbachev also made a series of arms control deals with the U.S., in part to buy time for his reforms to take hold and to help the struggling Soviet economy. But these reforms collided with the way that powerful forces within the Soviet ruling class saw their interests. And the reforms also uncorked political forces within Soviet society that Gorbachev had not anticipated and could not fully control. First within the Soviet Union itself, and then in the countries that formed what was called the Soviet bloc: Poland, Czechoslovakia, what was then called East Germany, and others. Gorbachev's gamble did not succeed. Powerful forces in the army finally arrested Gorbachev in the late summer of 1991. In response, the increasingly openly pro-capitalist political figure Boris Yeltsin rallied other forces. Yeltsin freed Gorbachev, but then Yeltsin essentially took control. He quickly dissolved the Soviet Union, dropped any remaining pretense to socialism, and opted to pursue a different path within the US-dominated imperialist order. Gorbachev retired from political life in Russia. In something terrible, or something truly emancipating, profound crisis, deepening divisions, the looming possibility of civil war, and the revolution that is urgently needed, a necessary foundation, a basic roadmap for this revolution, Bob Avakian discusses this experience and its relevance to today. B.A. says,
there is some important historical experience to learn from. Situations where a ruling class was no longer able to rule in the normal way that people had been conditioned to accept, and a real possibility arose of putting an end to the existing system, even one which had been so powerfully entrenched that such a profound change had long seemed impossible. This has happened especially when the ruling class, or a section of the ruling class of that system, no longer believes in and more or less openly abandons what had been the cohering norms, the regulating set of beliefs and processes of that system. This again is part of a more general phenomenon where major change and even a real revolution can become possible or more possible, not simply when there is a deep crisis in society, and not just when the ruling forces are seriously divided, but when they actually split apart and the old way of ruling can no longer hold.
B.A. goes on to describe what I just outlined in the Soviet Union as an example of this, as well as other important historical examples. And he applies these to the situation we face now. Here's what he says, speaking about the contemporary United States.
As is becoming more clear every day, there are deep and continually deepening divisions, not only in this country overall, but among the ruling powers of this system. And as I will get into more fully in a little while, one part of those ruling powers, represented by the Republican Party, no longer believes in or feels bound by what have been the cohering norms of democratic capitalist rule in this country. This is leading and will increasingly lead to further deepening divisions and bitter clashes throughout society, as well as at the top. All the ruling institutions of this system will be increasingly affected by this. The polarization will continue to sharpen, with forces grouped around and led by the Republican Party becoming even more aggressive in insisting on imposing, including by violent means, their vision of what makes America great, with all the very real horrors on top of horrors that this involves. All this itself will have contradictory effects, some definitely negative, but some positive or with positive potential. And as this unfolds, this profound truth will more and more forcefully be demonstrated. The crisis and deep divisions in society can only be resolved through radical means of one kind or another, either radically reactionary, murderously oppressive and destructive means, or radically emancipating, revolutionary means.
Gorbachev is dead. As the founder of communism, Karl Marx, once said, "Let the dead bury their dead." The point now is for we, the living, to study and grasp the most important lesson of his political life and fate, and to turn this understanding to the task and to the perhaps once-in-a-lifetime opportunity before us today. The underlying crisis facing U.S. society is deep and existential, as was the crisis in the Soviet Union. And in important ways, it is even more acute. The legitimating norms of this society are now openly being fought over in word and in real life. This crisis is not going away. And in fact, it's sharpening right now as we film this show. We can't afford to let such a crisis be resolved as it was in Russia in 1991, through the change from one set of imperialist norms to another, from one set of imperialist rulers to another. And we don't have to. The work I drew from just now, something terrible or something truly emancipating, contains the foundations to understand what we face and the roadmap out of the horror and into a revolution that can get humanity on the road to real emancipation. Get into this work. Get with it. And as the saying used to go, seize the time. The time is now.